For a while now, Gallagher has passively been assisting the Nameless throughout their stay in Penacony. He has helped the main character when Firefly was suspected as the stowaway, he helped Himeko and the gang gain access to the movie studios, and he even claims to have once been working for the Watchmaker. So it's natural to think that he's an ally we can count on. Now perhaps I've been overly trusting or naive, or maybe it's because he's offered me a drink both in the story and as part of his abilities, but we don't really know much about him. After the 2.1 ending, this question has become even more important. Just who exactly is Gallagher? What are his goals? And who is he actually working for? That's what we'll be discussing in this video. Before we do though, if you want to see more Honkai Star Rail content, do consider subscribing to the channel. As you might have guessed, given the subject of this video, it will be full of spoilers, especially related to the ending of 2.1 story. So if you haven't reached that point in the story yet, then you might want to refrain from watching this until a later date. Also, I'm going to outright warn you, this video will have several diverging tangents as I talk through it, as there are a lot of things to discuss and theorize about when it comes to Gallagher. When we first meet Gallagher, he actually ends up rescuing both the main character and Firefly. He makes his introductions after saving the main character from members of the Bloodhound family by convincing them that Firefly is not the stowaway they were looking for. Because of this, me and likely everyone else just accepted he was part of the Bloodhound since the other two members didn't really question him. We don't see Gallagher until much later in the story, and for a while, he was functionally of no concern. Now, there were some rather suspicious things happening throughout 2.0 related to him that, in hindsight, were functionally clues to his actual allegiance. For example, when Firefly and the main character were heading to the roof area, they came across another member of the Bloodhounds who wouldn't let them pass. One of the possible choices for dialogue was to name drop Gallagher. If you did this, the NPC would respond that he didn't know who that was, and nobody had authority to access this area regardless. It was rather odd that this person didn't know him, especially if Gallagher has been part of the Bloodhounds for a while, but I didn't dwell on it too much. This happens a few more times, as each time he is described or his name dropped, people vaguely remember him but can never completely recall. When we finally reach the end of 2.1, all these rather weird incidents made more sense, but I'll get to that in a bit. Throughout 2.1, we learn a bit more about him, and I'm just going to speed through this as I'm sure you already know it. We learn that he actually knows quite a lot about penacony and his true founder. He reveals that not only is the watchmaker Mikhail, but he once knew him, and that the title was something handed down, at least that's what he believes. The watchmaker can even be thought of as an organization, with several members, though only one member would ever hold the title of the watchmaker. He then mentions that while he isn't a companion of the watchmaker, he is instead one of his many children. If we take the non-literal route, he could just mean he is a member of the watchmaker's organization, rather than having any biological relation. Gallagher then explains that at some point, despite building penacony into what it is, the watchmaker and his children were ultimately betrayed by the family. They were functionally made to disappear, and their name and legacy were used by the family as a marketing tool, while behind closed doors, they secretly cursed the watchmaker. After their initial loss, and with Mikhail being too old to continue protecting his children, the remaining members left to find their own path and were functionally branded as traitors. Later on, Gallagher would return to Penacony and attempt to redeem the name of the watchmaker, but this goal would ultimately fail, and he would end up rejoining the family as a security officer. One rather interesting thing mentioned through this exposition dump is that when asked how old he is, Gallagher jokingly says he is 13. Now, you can take this as a straightforward, sarcastic barb by a clearly tired and defeated old man, but I'm gonna throw in a few alternative ideas. The 13 could refer to his position or rank within the watchmaker's organization. Perhaps he is the 13th member. There's also the possibility that he is an artificially created being and the 13th among many others, which again would fit in with the idea of being one of the watchmaker's children. I mean, it's not really impossible either, given the main character is outright stated to be an artificially created being, at least according to Kafka. So why wouldn't the watchmaker be capable of something similar? In addition, if he really was artificially created, Perhaps he is indeed 13 years old and he wasn't joking at all. Finally, the number 13 could be a reference to death, as in the Major Arcana Tarot card deck, 13 is the number that represents death, and we now know that the death meme is super best friends with our buddy Gallagher. The reason why these alternatives even exist is because the way the text is shown when he says 13 is capitalized, implying it has some significance. What makes this even more interesting is that in his character story part 4, it's heavily implied that he was actually alive during the early days of Penacony, when it was still a prison planet. He makes references to the prisoners and the events that occurred at that time, but doesn't actually confirm it when someone listening to his story actually asked him outright if he was indeed that old. Now, this contradictory information that Gallagher himself offers hints at who he actually is, or rather his affiliations. If you've seen the ending of 2.1, I'm sure you already know what I'm talking about. While this information reveals a lot about Gallagher, the problem with all this exposition is that you can't fully trust it, because Sunday ends up claiming that Gallagher is a servant of the Enigmata. I've talked about the Enigmata before in another video, so you can check that out if you want a bit more context, but Gallagher being one is a big problem, especially when it comes to the validity of the things he says. The entire ideology of the Enigmata is related to the obscuration of knowledge and information. Mythos believes that mortals aren't prepared or equipped to understand the truth of the universe. They likely believe that by hiding this knowledge away, they are functionally helping mortals by preventing them from discovering things they are not yet ready to hear. Most of the followers of the Enigmata, such as the history fictionologists and the riddlers, in some shape, way, or form, try to emulate the works of Mythos. They make things up, change facts, obscure data, and confuse language, all to ensure any form of truth, be it knowledge or otherwise, never sees the light of day. This means that if Gallagher is truly one of the Enigmata, as Sunday claims he is, then everything he says could have been an outright lie, and why whatever he has said appears to be contradicted by other information, like his character story. Now you might say, well, perhaps Sunday is lying or doesn't know the truth, but it's still a possibility, as Gallagher didn't outright deny it. And we know that the followers of Enigmata have been on Penacony since the very beginning. The story states that alongside the nameless, masked fools, mourning actors, and others who fought alongside the watchmaker, the history fictionologists were part of it as well. On top of that, there are plenty of other references to the Enigmata being on Penacony even today. If you went back to visit the Nightingale statues in Sunday's mansion, there are lore excerpts that show that the Enigmata has tampered with some of the information on Penacony itself. So whether you believe he is a follower of the Enigmata or not, it doesn't help that everything related to Gallagher is functionally a series of contradictions, which just makes it more likely that he is indeed related to the Enigmata. Even Sunday says that his appearance is an amalgamation of many individual traits of each family member. It's kind of like, on one hand, you can't trust his statements because the nature of the Enigmata is to lie and obscure, but the weirder his claims are, or the more contradictory they appear, then the more proof there is that he is indeed a follower of the Enigmata. Gallagher claims that he wants to reveal to the world the watchmaker's legacy and the truth about the family, but all of that goes against what the Enigmata fundamentally believe in. He claims to be 13, appears as middle-aged, but in his character story number 4, it hints at him being far older than that. So, discerning his actual goals is difficult the minute it is revealed that he has affiliations with the Enigmata. Perhaps there is a kernel of truth in his plan of wanting to help the watchmaker, but it's very likely that this may not be his only approach, since he's likely to obscure certain facts or things. So, let's take a step back and examine a few other possibilities on what Gallagher might actually be angling for. The first and simplest possibility is that despite being one of the Enigmata, having spent time on Penacony and being part of the Watchmakers organization amongst many of those other members, Gallagher is no longer concerned with the ideologies of the Path of Enigmata. Sunday's jab at him being a servant of the Enigmata may just be an insult given his past and not an indication of his true allegiances. As such, his goal to unearth the Watchmaker's legacy and expose the truth about the family is purely just that, a way to get his revenge on the family for what they did to his allies. An alternative idea is that Gallagher is perhaps trying to free his Enigmata comrades. Before the dreamscape we are familiar with today was created, there existed another shared dream among all the prisoners of the once prison planet. There are multiple hints within the story that suggest that the dreamscape we see the family operating is but a section of this larger dream. Given a war was fought long ago that involved the prisoners and the factions I mentioned earlier, what if some of these factions and their members are still stuck within that original dream? Since the family needs the dreamscape to exist to ensure theirs does as well, perhaps most of these prisoners are kept constantly dreaming so that the dreamscape can persist. It's possible that Gallagher's true intentions in this context may be to help grant freedom to the other history fictionologists currently trapped in the dreamscape. Perhaps his priorities are to his comrades of the Enigmata, and freeing everyone else is just a nice bonus. A third possibility that ties in a bit better with his background as a follower of the Enigmata is that maybe Gallagher is trying to hide a secret far bigger than what has been hinted at so far. As the story has progressed, the Watchmaker's legacy is mentioned to be something that can upend the family itself. It's their biggest source of shame. But what if the secret of this legacy is far more dangerous than we initially expect? After all, we don't really know what this legacy even is, despite numerous references to it. There's a possibility that many who have spoken about it are speculating on what it actually is, and only those of the Enigmata, the faction that hides knowledge and information, actually know the truth. As I've mentioned, the Enigmata believe that mortals are not prepared to understand the universe and the truth about it, so perhaps that is exactly what Gallagher is trying to keep hidden. There is the possibility that the legacy may actually reveal something about how the universe works. I mean, the whole story with penacony started when prisoners were brought to the planet to salvage leaking memoria from the macro void. The memoria and the macro void hasn't really been explained, but what if it means that the substance that induces dreams, i.e. the memoria, is extra-dimensional in nature or even a substance from another reality? What if it's related to the Honkai Impact universe? I mean, wealth is clearly mentioned to come from that universe specifically, so perhaps the macro void is the sea of quanta itself. Obviously, this might reveal too much about the nature of Honkai Star Rail's universe and why the Enigmata may actually try to obscure it. The family secrets, the dreams, maybe Gallagher doesn't actually care about either of those things because there's a much bigger secret at play here. One that even Sunday isn't aware of that Gallagher is trying to hide. Finally, the last idea I'd like to share is one related to theories I've shared about in the past, specifically about the idea that the Star Rail universe and story is one that is on a loop. Everything everyone is doing or saying has been predetermined, and it's nothing more than fate repeating itself. There's a lot of hints to this, like Elio's own ideology and even how the eons work, but I won't talk about those here. If you're curious, you can look up some of the videos I've done on the topic. The reason why I think this is a possibility is because of the final line of dialogue Gallagher has. Sunday, having dropped all pretense, angrily asks Gallagher why he chose to kill his sister Robin. Gallagher explains his position but ends his explanation by saying that the whole thing is just fate playing a cruel joke on us. This makes me believe that Gallagher likely knows the truth of the Star Rail universe, or rather the one I have theorized, and his justifications is that he is only playing out what fate has already decided. This line seems to imply that Gallagher at least believes the question to be of no consequence, as whether he wants to or not, he is bound to fate itself, having to play the story out as it has been intended. He knows that he is a cog in the machine and that when all things are considered, no one is truly free. Perhaps again, this is what the Enigmata aims to shield the mortals from. The truth that everything you do is functionally pointless as it's already been decided. The story has already been written and mortals are just puppets playing their parts. Now, all things considered, there's a lot of possibilities here and these are just theories at best. Maybe Sunday is lying. Maybe Gallagher is lying. Maybe there's something else happening entirely. We don't really have all the pieces at the moment, so at best I can only make educated guesses. But given what we do know, the idea that someone from the Enigmata would want to reveal secrets to the wider universe seems contradictory to their ideology, so I'm guessing there's something more at play here. But it's not something I can definitively say, and as such, I'll bring the video to a close. Obviously, there are many more possibilities as to what might be happening, so if you have any interesting ideas, feel free to share them in the comments below. If you found the video entertaining or even helpful, do consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and as usual, have a nice day.